Hello, I'm Bradley Sward, Associate Professor of Computer Information Systems at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And this video is part 5 of a continuing series where we're going to make the game Boxxle / Sokoban, and we're going to make it both in GameMaker Studio 2 and then port it over into our own custom C++ SFML engine. So we've already basically made the game in GameMaker, and we are in the process of developing the basics of our engine in part 5 here. So to get the engine going, you need part 4, so please watch that video if you need help to get that to us to get to that point. So now, again, what are we trying to make? We're trying to make a voxel game, pushing blocks around and just make it so you can walk and push blocks from a point A to a goal. And so our game is going to run in 720p resolution, and our tiles are going to be 60 by 60 when we get to that point, but just as a remembrance of where we're going. Okay, so what are we going to do in this video? We are going to tidy up the game class just a little bit before we get into turning the singleton, into the class into a singleton, and then we're going to add some extra customizability because right now everything is hard-coded when it comes to resolutions and title bars, and even the game speed is kind of hard-coded right now. So that's the idea. So I have everything up and running in Visual Studio to get going, and the first thing I want to do is just change this render window into a pointer instead of a reference or a value type, and we're going to need this when we pass things around. We're not going to want to pass copies of render windows around. We're going to want to have to pass the real deal stuff, so that just adjusts things over here. I'm just going to have to new up a render window. And then because I'm newing up memory, I have to delete it at some point, so that actually affects my destructor. I'll have to put that in there. And then set it up and quick actions, get it going over here. And all I'm going to do is delete window. That's all there is to it. For every new, there's a delete. And when this thing gets created, it news it. And whenever it goes out of scope, it deletes it. So good thing we don't have to worry. I'm not going to worry about the shape because in a video or two, we're going to get rid of it altogether as we move into bigger and better things. This is just kind of the placeholder for just making sure everything's working. And we don't have to worry about the time per frame because that doesn't need to be newed up or anything like that also, because it's not as complicated as an object. Okay, so that was the tidying up. Really nothing else has to be worried about right now. Okay, so next step is to turn this thing into a singleton. And remember, the whole point of a singleton is now, if I create this and do this correctly, that no matter where I am in my program and I ask, hey, can you get me the SFMLGame object, there will only be one that exists in my computer's memory. And so I can always get the one and only object instead of accidentally having 3 or 4 or 5 of these things open. And like if I access the wrong one, things can go wrong. So in this case, I can go, always get me the one that exists in my game. And again, we can always discuss, is this a good thing, a bad thing, or whatever, but it doesn't much matter. We're doing it. So if you have a better way of doing it, send me a comment, send me an email, let me know what I could do better in a future video. So to make this thing work, and also singleton, I've already talked about this in previous lectures, maybe not here on YouTube, but if you need a refresher on what singleton is and how it works, then just fall back on other online alternatives here. So what I need to do is make my constructor private of all things, right? I'll need a static variable for a pointer to an SFMLGame object. And it's static. Everything this is the fun of this is the static idea here. And since I'm going to create it here, I can create it, put it over here. I have to define it. SFMLGame pointer, SFMLGame instance equals null pointer. So we'll start out as a null pointer. I gotta fix up that, I don't like the pointer being put there. That's my thing. Okay, so then there, and then I need a function. So the public function is a static function to return an SFMLGame pointer using a getInstance function. This is the conventional way of doing things, at least in C++. And at some point I will stop fighting moving that pointer around. Okay, so I can access this function, create this function, and so what I'm doing over here is basically saying, because it starts out as null pointer, the first time I go ahead and do this, and so if I say if my instance is null pointer, then the first time you access this thing, then say, okay, I'll make a new SFMLGame here. And so then the game will call the constructor, which calls this constructor, which calls all the other constructors, which actually gets our game window going. But that's just for the first go. Every other time through, the thing's already created, so the if statement will fall through. The if statement will fall through, and then I can just return whatever that thing is, no matter what. So It always gives me a way to only get one access to one object. And so maybe you already noticed while I was skipping through here, the last thing I need to do is change all these dots to arrows. That's just the way the C++ syntax is, because I'm using a pointer, and the syntax for pointers are different for pointers than value types and reference types. You Java people and Python people on all the higher level languages, you don't see that anymore. It's pretty much a C++ thing. So let's see, does this thing work? And I go, no, it won't, because we did all the code on the SFMLGame side, but we did not do any of the code on the main side. So this 2-liner can reduce now to a 1-liner, SFMLGame, and I can actually just do SFMLGame : get instance, and then I can call run. Why isn't the IntelliSense helping me out here? Maybe because I put too much stuff there. And then I don't need to delete game, again, because when this thing goes out of scope and gets killed, when the main ends, then the destructor will get called. So we don't have to worry about that. So all that work, that wasn't really hard work. Already got that thing going 6 minutes into the video, and there you go. I'm right back to where I was. I'm refactored. I have my render window using a pointer, and so forth. So now big jump cut here. So now you can see I am going to fix up the variables and make them a little more customizable, because now let's take a look over here. Like that frame rate is hard-coded, or was hard-coded as a static variable. I got rid of that a minute ago while I was working this out. Same with the window resolution. I should be able to set it to whatever I want, whenever I want. Same with frame rate, and same with the title bar. I should be able to set that thing whenever the heck I want. And so now these functions will allow me to do that. So what did I do? I got rid of all the static variables except for instance. So I'm saying this is just a refactoring on my own. There's no reason to put you through this. So the only static variable so far is instance, and then that just kept the same null pointer. Nothing else was modified. And now all the other variables you see here are now added to this. They're not static, and they're just plain old normal member variables. So frames per second, that's exactly what we expect. Frames per second is a float, and then it goes into this time per frame. So again, we need both of these because of the way that the number systems work. And now for the window width and height, I have 2 int variables for that. I have a string variable set aside for the title bar text, and then you're used to the window and the shape already. That's already there. So these are the variables that so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them now, 7 member variables, part of the game class, and 1 static. And so now looking over here, I can drag this over so you can see it a little better. Oh my goodness, yeah, so you can see the whole thing. There we go. So now taking into account, here's my static variable, here is the constructor, here's my frames per second, here is my width, here's my height, and I'm using default values. So default value 60 is the frame rate, 720p resolution. The title bar is whatever you want it to be. Obviously, you're not going to want to put my name in there. And then the window is going to be set up with the render window. And now these, instead of hard-coded numbers, now these are using these variables. There's my width, there's my height, there's my title bar text. And then the shape and the time per frame are identical then to what you've seen before. So those of you doing this for homework, there are other things that you're going to have to do, but it's the same thing. Add a member variable, give it a default value, give it a get and a set, and figure out if it actually works. And we'll show, I'll show you in a minute here that it's not always as easy, because just setting a variable inside of this class doesn't actually do work when it comes to the window stuff. So that's just setting up the new variables for this kind of thing. And so now looking at the new function calls, so I get this get instance can go away since we already have that. But all of these other ones, seven functions are new. There's a get window function because I know I'm going to need that at some later time. We'll talk about this later on. So there's a get window, and since it's a pointer now that this is render window is a pointer, now I can be happy with returning the window pointer. And then I have get and set for the frame rate. Instead of having individual gets and sets for the width and the height, I just have a function for setting the entire resolution. because you're generally never going to change just the width or just the height. You're going to do both. And then I can also get the current window resolution using this new thing called vector2u. We'll see this in a minute here. And then since the title bar can be a string, I can return a string, that is my title bar, and I can set it by sending in a new title string. So this is the new functionality. So what do I have down here? Let's find it. Get window just simply returns window. It's a pointer. I'm returning a pointer. I can return a pointer. Render window pointer. That's legit. That's totally fine. For get frames per second, I will return that frames per second rate. That's the floating point number of how many frames per second the game should run at the current time. And so now when I want to set it, it's the same thing like I did in the constructor. There's two separate variables I have to tinker with. The frames per second just makes it easy for me to return that value, like when I ask for it, what is the current frame rate? And then the time per frame is you just take 1 second and you divide by that frame rate and it turns into however many milliseconds it needs to perform. And again, this all goes into the function, which function here? This function here, the run function, which we talked about in part 4. So that just handles the frame rate. So now setting the window resolution, there are probably better ways to do this, but this is the way I chose to do this, because what you have to do basically is reset the window. You can't just, because of the way everything is set up. So all I did was, I guess you can put this in any order you want. I can delete the previous window, because it's a pointer, so I delete that window with all of its settings, and then I reset the width and height settings basically off of whatever I'm told to do, and then I set up a new window just like I do inside of the constructor. So again, probably simpler ways to do this, but how often are you going to change the window resolution? So it doesn't have to be the coolest, quickest, easiest way to work it out. It just has to get the job done. Because most chances are, if you're going to change the window resolution, you're going to do it in like the first game frame, and you're not going to notice any jankiness going on. But if you're doing this non-stop, if you're continually changing everything around, yeah, I can imagine this probably would not be the best way to go about doing it. But for today, perfectly legit. And then getting the window resolution. If you just say the window has a get size function, and it has a vector2u, and I go, okay, I could right click on this and go go to definition, and I go, what is a vector2u? It's just a vector2 of unsigned int. And you go, oh my goodness, what is a vector2? And a vector2 is just a class. It's its own class that just maintains an x and a y value under the hood. So it's basically a fancy 2-parameter vector, however you want it, 2-element array, however you want to think about it. And the U just stands for unsigned. We're going to see that there's unsigned, U is for unsigned, I is for int, there's F for float, and so forth and so on. I think we can see it if we go to definition here. Maybe not. Yep. There's 2I, 2U, 2F. And it looks like those are the 3 types that this library uses under the hood. So this just makes it easy, because then I can just return it as, a vector. I don't have to return it in any weird format. I don't have to create a new format for this thing to work. And so if I want to, then I can just say get size and then a dot, and then you can see there's X and Y, and we just have to presume X is the horizontal and Y is the vertical. Which makes sense, right? Because X is a horizontal component of the gaming, and Y is a vertical component, at least normally in the 2D sense anyway. Okay, so that handles window resolution. And then to tap it all off here, just the title bar text. Since I'm saving that as a string inside of my own class, if you're asking for it, I can just return it back. And if you're setting it, it's a 2-step process. Give me your new text. I'll set it to, set my variable under the hood to this, whatever you want it to be, and then I will set the title using through the window to whatever the title bar needs to be. So coming back, so if I run this as they see it with everything with all the defaults, here's your red window, my red circle in a 720p resolution, and you go, let's see, is this 0, 1, 2, yep, about 2 seconds per line, because there's 120 dots being drawn per line there. So yep, this is running at about 60 frames per second. So you're like, okay, that is the default. But if I ever wanted to change anything, I can go here over to main, and I can show you here. So I can so this is just the default. I just run the game. Get instance sets up the constructor, right? The get instance because the first time I ever call this thing sets up the frame rate with the width and the height and the title bar and the window and everything else that goes into this, and then just runs the main game loop. But now if I wanted to modify this, this is all I kind of have to do. At any time I can get, and I don't necessarily have to have instance, but it just, do you really want to do, I mean, you don't have to care, but do I want to do get instance arrow, get instance arrow, get instance arrow? You can kind of see that, however you want to do it. You can do things both ways. But now I can change the resolution, or I can change the resolution to 100 by 100, or in this case, how about 400 by 400? I can change the text bar to be hello text bar. I can change the frame rate. Let's make it a little more, let's make it 10 instead of 30, and then I'll run the game. And now you can see here's 400 by 400, that's the window of the circle. The frame rate now is obviously going much, much slower. So, I mean, it would take about 12 seconds now, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going a little fast, but you get the point. And the text bar, this is not your text bar. This is basically, your text bar is this guy right here. Hello text bar. That's what's been modified. So, this is just a good starter because there's other things you can do with the mouse. Like you can go into, here, let me go back into here. I can just do window, and I can do arrow, and I can say you can see all the things you can access, all of the functionality of the hood, and anything you can see with the word set. You could add a wrapper function to make this thing work. Set active. So like when the window is active, is the game still running? So you can actually pause the game while the game is not at the active window. I can set frame rate limit. What? Is that new? Maybe. Oh shoot. So anyway, so maybe all this time we didn't need this kind of stuff. So I just maybe learned something. I'll have to look into this for future videos. I can set the mouse cursor. Is the mouse cursor visible while the mouse is inside of your game window? Set the position of the window on your screen. Where do you want this thing to go? I wish GameMaker knew how to do that so well. Set the size, set the title, set VSync enabled, set the view, set visibility, so forth. Like there's a lot going on here. And it's up to you because right now I can still, if I do get window, I can get the window and I can do all that stuff. But as a programmer, as someone who's writing a library, who's creating an engine, my job is to kind of take those details away from you. And so like if I set up these wrapper functions like I see here, like that makes it a lot easier for you to use them, because even if, later on I go, because SFML sucks and let's change to something new. Like you don't have to know anything about how SFML works under the hood when you just call my function, and I'm the one who took care of all the work to make it work with this new library that we're working with. So this is kind of the get window function is kind of like that. Do you really want to do something that I don't give you access to? Well, I'm not trying to keep it away from you. So because of that, you can go ahead and just take the window and do whatever you want. So it's just, basically that's how things work like that. So it's just the catch-all. Like you didn't see what you want, you can do it. And I would say if that's the case, if I was writing the library, like tell me about that, and I'll create the wrapper functions for you, so you don't have to go in and manually play with the window, because you shouldn't have to worry about that. You want to use the engine code that should never ever 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 change, and the only people who should have to ever worry about that are the people writing the engine, not the people writing the games. So anyway. So again, coming back, there's more to this for the homework assignment. I just kind of set everything up to get you going halfway through. And so those of you in my class, send me some questions if you have them. You should be able to, you definitely can access all of the variables and all of the new stuff that you need to access inside of the window class to make it all work. As always, if you have any questions or something didn't work out right or anything like that, send me a comment here on YouTube, send me an email through swardb@cod.edu, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks. Have a good one, guys.